And welcome to week number 2 with Guitar Lessons with Mr. Gerry. Last week, I did a very quick overview of a lot of the things that we've done, whether it is in the upper elementary guitar classes or even my after-school guitar class. And most of you should know a lot of that material. I'm going to go over a little bit of that again today in a little more detail, but also go to where we want to be. And that is that last time in lesson 3, which is learning the notes, tuning the guitar, what's important to me about learning an instrument is not just to learn, like put your fingers here and it's that chord, and put your finger there and it's that note, but to understand why you're putting your fingers where they are, and what that note is and what it represents, because then you know what to do with those notes to do more with the music. I'll show you what I mean. When you know your notes, we know that all notes in music are consisting of half steps and whole steps apart from each consecutive note or letter. For example, we have the note A, and it's a whole step to B, and a half step to C, and a whole step to D, and a whole step to E, and a half step to F, and a whole step to G, and a whole step back to A. So that's the progression of the whole steps and half steps in music. On a keyboard, it's easy to see because the half step is like a white key to the very next black key next to it, or the place where there's two white keys together and there's no black key in the middle. It's the very next note. The guitar, being a linear instrument, is also what's called a chromatic. It's linear because all the notes are in a line, and it's chromatic because every fret is a new half step in your music. So you go 1 fret for a half step and 2 frets for a whole step. So that's what lesson 3 is showing you, where all the notes are: E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G on your guitar. And so what's not important is simply to memorize where those notes are right there, but to understand that when you start with the 6-string E, it's a half step up to F and a whole step up to G. And when you go to your A string, it's a whole step up to B and a half step to C. So your strings, the name of your strings, gives you the starting point of where to find the notes. And that's what's important, so that you can always find a note, not necessarily memorize it. Because the more you know chords and the more you know about the chords, you will then automatically see what those notes are that are under your fingers or in the open strings. So that's what lesson 3 is all about. Now, when you turn to lesson 4, we go from notes to chords. And chords is really what we want to learn on the guitar. But again, it's not just put your fingers here and that's this chord and put your fingers there, but it's knowing why you're putting your fingers where you're putting them. And that we're going to finish this lesson with. So in lesson 4, it shows you right there in the middle the chords in the key of C. We have the 1 chord C, and the 2 chord D minor, and the 3 chord E minor, and the 4 chord F, and the 5 chord G, and the 6 chord A minor. But we do not show the 7 chord because that diminished chord on the guitar is just not used quite a lot. And so, when we need it, I'll teach that and put that in the lesson. But in the meantime, practice those 6 chords, the 3 majors and the 3 minors in the key of C and in the subsequent keys that we're going to look into, to just practice getting your fingers on the guitar. And like I said last week, when you play a chord, you want to make sure that your fingers are pressing down, like I showed you, like this, as straight down onto the string as possible, so that your fingers aren't leaning over and touching the other strings. You want to hear every note, every string, nice and clear like that, so it rings and your fingers aren't muting or not pressing hard enough. So when you look at exercise 1, you see a C chord going to a G7 chord. And what I want you to see there is that we see that there's all kinds of patterns that our fingers are going to learn. For example, the C chord uses the 4 inside strings, strings 2, 3, 4, and 5, so that our first finger is on the 2nd string, 1st fret, and our second finger is on the 4th string, 2nd fret, and our 3rd finger is on the 5th string, 3rd fret. And because you see the little X over string 6, that means we're not playing that string for now, because the note on the 5th string is the C, and so that becomes the root or the bass of our C chord. Like that, okay? Now, the cool thing about moving that C to a G7 is that these two fingers here simply jump up to the 5th and 6th strings, while this first finger jumps down from the 2nd string to the 1st string, and we have our G7 chord. So that's why exercise 1, we're practicing going from the C to the G7 and back to the C again. And to do it musically, we play the C 4 times, to the G7 4 times, back to the C 4 times, and the G7 4 times, and then you can end on the C and make it sound nice and musical. So the next exercise 2 goes from the D chord to the A7 chord. So now we're in the key of D, playing again the 1 and the 5 chords. So that what we want to see when we play the D chord is that our first finger is on the 3rd string, 2nd fret, while our 2nd finger is on the 1st string, 2nd fret, and the 3rd finger is on the 2nd string, 3rd fret. Now, one of the things that we learn here is that because our 3rd finger is in front of the 1st finger, the 1st finger can lean over to the 2nd string because the 3rd finger playing the 2nd string is in front of it, so it doesn't matter if that finger is leaning over and muting the string because we have a note or a finger in front of it. The 2nd finger, however, needs to make sure that the note on the 1st string is nice and clear and that the note on our 2nd string is not leaning over and muting that note on the 1st string. So when we change to our 5 chord A7, we see that these two fingers here simply now jump up to the 2nd and 4th strings, and our 5th string A is the bass note for that chord. This is our A7, and we have the D, 2, 3, A7, and our D, and then that's exercise 2. So we want to just keep doing that with all the exercises on lesson 4, so that we're getting our fingers used to playing the notes on the strings and going back and forth to these chords. And that reminds me of one very important thing, and that is when we play from one chord to another chord, we want to see where our fingers are with the one chord and where they're going to in the next chord. In other words, we don't take our fingers and play a chord and then take them off and look at our chart and put this one here, put this one there, and play that next chord because we haven't learned to go from this chord to the next chord. And that's why whenever you look at the next chord in your sequence, you see where your fingers are and you want to see where they're going to. And that's what makes the nice transition there. So again, what I'm going to do is finish very quickly, because when we're learning these chords, you can jump all the way over to lesson 10. And lesson 10 was the lesson that showed us why we put our fingers where we put them. And that is, of course, understanding that a chord is based upon the root and the 3rd and the 5th of its beginning note, or the scale like that. So if I'm in C, I have C, skip D, E, skip F, and G. C, E, and G are the 3 notes that make up a C chord. So when I find the C on the 5th string, and the E on the 4th string, and the open G on the 3rd string, and the C on the 2nd string, and the open E on the 1st string, there's my C chord. And that's why I put my fingers there to make a C chord. So now we look at things like, well, look, I can play a G on the 1st string, 3rd fret. So does that make it a new chord? No, it just makes it a C chord with a G on the top instead of an E on the top. Oh, look, there's a G on the 6th string, on the 6th string, 3rd fret. Does that make it a different chord? No, it just gives you another bass note. See? And things like that. And then later on, we're going to learn really cool things like, well, if I take the octave tone and I move it down a half step, then I make what's called a major 7 chord. And if I move that same note down another half step, I have what's called a 7 chord. And if I move that same note down one more time, I have what's called the 6 chord. See? Or if I take the 3rd and I lower it, I got to play it a special way. Here's my C chord, but if I lower that third, then it becomes a minor chord, like that, you see. Or if I take the third and I raise it a half step, it becomes what's called a suspended 4, and all those are the things that make learning how to put more music into what you're doing easy, because you're learning what the chord is and what the music actually does and what the notes do and which notes to work with, the roots, the thirds, the octaves, the fifths and the octaves, like that, to make all the different kinds of chords. So keep practicing, practice all those chords. Next week, what I'm going to do is come back with a song that will probably use the C and G7, and then maybe another song that might use the D and the A7. So we'll actually practice some songs with these chords. So thank you for tuning in. Have a wonderful week. Mr. Gerry, to all my Keystone buddies out there, have a great week. Stay safe, be good, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.